An exciting story of redemption, love, passion, and new beginnings. She just wanted to adjust her bra strap. He, a tormented millionaire, saw in that gesture everything he had lost and everything that could destroy him. What begins with a casual touch unleashes a dangerous, sensual romance full of secrets that go far beyond passion. Keep reading until the end. You'll be surprised by this story. If you enjoy stories of love and romance, keep reading as we continue. The moment when Victor Ravenswood's life began to crumble for the second time was so ordinary that it would have gone unnoticed by anyone else, but not by him. It happened during the spring charity auction at Ravenswood Vineyards, where politicians, businessmen, and artists gathered to maintain with appearances what they couldn't sustain with soul. The property stretched across acres of rolling green hills in Sonoma Valley, California, where the wind carried the sweet aroma of grapes and the weight of traditions that Victor had carried on his shoulders since taking over the family business at 14 years ago. He walked across the polished marble floor, antiseptic and golden, greeting guests with the cold courtesy he had learned to master. The charity event was an annual tradition, a way for the Ravenswood family to maintain their impeccable reputation in the region. Local politicians, agribusiness executives, artists from San Francisco and Los Angeles, all there to auction artwork and culinary experiences for noble causes that most would forget by Monday. Victor wore an impeccable navy blue suit, his dark hair combed back, revealing slightly graying temples that had begun to appear after Alice's death 3 years ago. At 42, he still attracted interested glances from the women present, but there was a coldness in his brown eyes that kept any approach at a respectful distance. He had learned to smile without smiling, to converse without saying anything, to exist without living. Ravenswood Vineyards was more than a business. It was an empire built by his Italian grandfather, expanded by his father, and now maintained by him with the mechanical precision of someone who had lost passion for what he did, but couldn't abandon the weight of responsibility. The walls of the main hall were covered with paintings by local artists. The imported crystal chandeliers reflected the golden late-afternoon light that entered through the French windows, and the discreet sound of a string quartet filled the spaces between polite conversations and rehearsed laughter. That's when he saw her. Claire Sullivan was standing under the warm light of a crystal chandelier, trying with almost distracted delicacy to adjust her bra strap beneath her simple black dress. The gesture wasn't sensual. It was human, intimate, fragile. An interruption in time that made Victor freeze in the middle of the hall, with a wine glass in his hands and a conversation about exports half finished. The world collapsed silently from within. She didn't know she was being watched, nor would she know the weight of that gesture. But to him, Claire wasn't just a stranger lost in the middle of a party that clearly wasn't her natural environment. She was a call, an echo, a tear in the carefully constructed reality he had inhabited for 3 years. Because that exact movement, that nervous and timid adjustment of the strap, had already been made by another woman, a dead woman, Alice Ravenswood, his wife, his guilt, the end and beginning of everything. Claire, at 29, an English literature teacher at a public school in Mendocino, was there by chance. Her friend Mariana, a freelance journalist who covered social events for lifestyle magazines, had convinced her to accompany her in covering the auction, an opportunity to breathe away from the city, from the debts accumulated after months away from work, due to the legal process against Julian, her ex-partner, from consultations with lawyers that cost more than she could afford, from a life that seemed to want to disintegrate bit by bit, since she found the courage to break a relationship that suffocated her. She wore a dress borrowed from her friend, a simple black model that was loose on the hips and tight on the chest, borrowed heels that made her uncomfortable, borrowed courage that made her question her presence there every minute that passed. Her brown hair was tied in a bun that she had hurriedly arranged in the car, and she felt like an imposter amid so much natural elegance. Mariana had disappeared to photograph the auctions, leaving Claire alone with a glass of sparkling wine she had barely touched and a growing desire to go home. She observed the people around her, as she always did, with the curious gaze of someone who teaches literature and finds stories in each face, each gesture, each silence. But there, surrounded by conversations about expensive wines and international trips, she felt small and out of place. That's when she noticed someone was watching her. Victor was standing a few meters away, and when their eyes met, Claire felt something strange. It wasn't the kind of look she usually received from men at parties, loaded with obvious interest or superficial curiosity. It was a look that seemed to recognize her, as if she was someone he had known for a long time and was meeting again after a long absence. A look that left her breathless for a moment. He approached slowly, with the controlled walk of someone used to commanding environments, but there was something different in his posture. An almost imperceptible vulnerability that Claire, trained by life to perceive emotional nuances, immediately caught. "I'm sorry if I bothered you by staring," he said, stopping at a respectful distance. His voice was deep, with a slight Northern California accent that he hadn't completely erased despite years studying in New York and traveling the world. "I thought I recognized someone in you." Claire smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face and made something stir in Victor's chest. "I think that would be impossible. This is my first time at an event like this." "Victor Ravenswood," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "Claire Sullivan." The handshake was firm, but her hands were smaller and more callous than those of the women he usually interacted with. Hands of someone who works, who writes, who lives. "Make yourself at home," she said, then laughed at her own comment. "Sorry, what an obvious thing to say to the owner of the place." Victor smiled for the first time in months. A true smile. "Don't apologize. It's the first natural thing I've heard tonight." They talked for almost an hour. Claire spoke about literature, about teaching Hemingway to teenagers who grew up with social media, about the difficulty of making students understand that the classics spoke about universal emotions. Victor listened to her with an attention she wasn't used to receiving. It wasn't the kind of polite attention people devote to social conversation. It was real, interested, as if every word she said mattered. He spoke little about himself, but Claire noticed the nuances. The way his eyes darkened when she mentioned happy marriages while commenting on The Great Gatsby. The almost imperceptible tension in his shoulders when someone approached to greet him. The way his fingers nervously drummed on the side of the glass when periods of silence extended. "Do you like Virginia Woolf?" he asked suddenly, in the middle of a pause in the conversation. Claire blinked, surprised by the change of subject. "I love her." "Why?" "I have a private library with some rare first editions. It includes some volumes of hers." He paused as if measuring his words. "Perhaps you'd like to see it, if you're interested in English literature." There was something strange about the invitation. It wasn't the kind of approach Claire would expect from a man at a social event. It was almost professional, as if he were offering access to something genuinely valuable, not using the library as a pretext for something else. "I'd love to," she replied, and realized she really would. The conversation was interrupted by Mariana, who appeared with the camera in her hands and a curious smile on her face. "Claire, we need to go. The editor wants the photos today." The introductions were quick. Mariana was polite, but Claire noticed the evaluative look her friend directed at Victor. In the car on the way back to Mendocino, Mariana was direct. "You know who that man is, don't you?" "The owner of the vineyard," Claire replied, looking out the window at the hills that were lost in the darkness. "The widower of the vineyard," Mariana corrected. "His wife died 3 years ago in a strange accident. She fell from the balcony of the mansion on a rainy night. They say she had psychiatric problems, deep depression. Victor Ravenswood became a recluse after that. This was probably the first social event he's organized since then." Claire felt a tightness in her chest. The sadness she had perceived in his eyes gained a painful context. "How terrible." "What surprises me," continued Mariana, "is that he spent so much time talking with you. According to people who know the family, he barely talked to anyone. He basically became a hermit." Claire didn't respond, but she couldn't get Victor out of her head during the entire trip. There was something in the way he had looked at her, as if she were important in a way she couldn't understand. And there was something in her own reaction to him, a connection that seemed disproportionate for a first meeting. 2 days later, when she arrived home from school on a rainy Tuesday, she found correspondence that left her confused. It was a cream-colored envelope, heavy, with the Ravenswood family crest embossed in gold. Inside was a formal letter, written on letterhead from the Ravenswood Institute. The letter explained about an educational project called Literature and Emotional Expression, aimed at developing innovative methodologies for teaching literature using therapeutic and self-knowledge techniques. The project would be developed at the Ravenswood property. in partnership with universities in San Francisco and Los Angeles. They offered her a position as pedagogical coordinator, with housing in a historic mansion on the property, a salary that doubled her monthly paycheck from the public school, and the opportunity to work with educational resources she had never had access to. Claire read the letter 3 times before believing it. It was exactly the kind of opportunity she had dreamed of during years of teaching at a school with few resources, of nights trying to motivate students who saw few prospects for the future, of months struggling to pay bills while dealing with the consequences of an abusive relationship. But there was something strange. The letter was signed by a Dr. Beatrice Sanders, academic director of the Ravenswood Institute, but there was no direct mention of Victor, as if the meeting between them at the auction hadn't happened, as if it were a coincidence. Claire hesitated. She called Mariana, who encouraged her to accept. "It's a unique opportunity, Claire. And you need to get out of Mendocino for a while, get away from everything that reminds you of Julian." She refused. She wrote a polite letter, thanking them for the opportunity, but explaining that she couldn't abandon her students in the middle of the semester. She sent the response the same day. 3 days later, she received a call. It was Dr. Beatrice Sanders, a woman with a soft and convincing voice, who explained that the project could be adapted to start only during the July break, 2 weeks from now. Claire could visit the property and facilities, evaluate the available resources, and decide calmly. There was no pressure. It was just an opportunity for professional expansion that might not appear again. Claire thought about the salary that would allow her to pay off the debts left by the judicial process. She thought about the possibility of working with quality educational resources. She thought about the chance to get away, at least temporarily, from a city where every corner reminded her of painful moments. And, if she were honest with herself, she thought about Victor Ravenswood and the way he had made her feel seen, really seen, for the first time in a long time. She accepted. On the Saturday morning she traveled to Sonoma Valley, Claire woke up with a strange anxiety. It wasn't just nervousness about a new professional opportunity. It was as if she were being pulled by something greater than her own will, as if this change were inevitable, in a way she couldn't explain. She packed carefully, taking her favorite books, the few good clothes she owned, and a family photograph that always accompanied her. Before leaving home, she looked one last time at the small apartment where she had lived for the past 2 years, since leaving the house she shared with Julian. It was a modest space, but it was hers. Leaving seemed like an act of courage and recklessness at the same time. The car trip to Sonoma Valley took 2 hours. As she approached the Ravenswood property, Claire felt her heart race. The landscape changed gradually, cities giving way to green hills covered with vineyards, smaller roads winding between valleys where the morning mist was still slowly dissipating. The property gate was impressive, wrought iron with gold details, flanked by stone pillars where the family crest was engraved. A uniformed employee received her with professional courtesy and guided her along an internal road that stretched for almost 2 kilometers between perfectly aligned vineyards. The first view of the main mansion took her breath away. It was a 3-story building in Spanish colonial style, with wide verandas supported by carved wooden columns, colored glass windows, and a front garden that seemed to have come out of a fairy tale. But that wasn't where she would stay. The employee led her along a Portuguese stone path to a smaller but equally impressive building, located on an elevation that offered a view of the entire valley. "This is the guest house," explained the man, a grey-haired gentleman with gentle manners, who introduced himself as Mr. Ambrose, caretaker of the property for more than 20 years. It was built in 1920 to receive artists and writers who came to spend time here. The family has always had great appreciation for the arts. The house was perfect. 2 bedrooms, a living room with a stone fireplace, a fully equipped kitchen, and best of all, a private library, with floor-to-ceiling shelves and a leather armchair positioned near a window that looked out over the vineyards. Claire immediately felt at home. "Mr. Victor asked that you settle in at your leisure," said Mr. Ambrose. "He would like to receive you for dinner tomorrow at 8 if it's convenient. Today we'll let you rest from your journey." Claire nodded, but noticed that her hands were trembling slightly. The prospect of seeing Victor again made her nervous in a way she couldn't explain. There was something in the way he had looked at her at the auction, something in the intensity of that meeting, that made her feel as if she were about to enter unknown territory. After Mr. Ambrose left, Claire explored the house slowly. Each room was decorated with impeccable taste. Antique furniture that told stories, paintings by American artists she recognized from the art books she browsed in the school library. But there was something more, an atmosphere she couldn't define, as if the house held memories, as if each object had been chosen by someone who understood the importance of beauty to the soul. In the library, she found the first editions of Virginia Woolf that Victor had mentioned, ancient editions with leather covers and pages yellowed by time. But there was much more. American classics, contemporary literature, philosophy, psychology. A collection that revealed an owner with a curious mind and refined sensitivity. It was when she was leafing through a volume of Emily Dickinson that she found, between the pages, a forgotten business card. Alice Ravenswood, visual artist. On the back, written by hand with delicate handwriting, "Art is the lie that enables us to realize the truth. Picasso." Claire held the card for a long moment, feeling the weight of that discovery. Alice, Victor's dead wife, had also spent time in this house, in this library, perhaps in this same armchair where Claire now sat. There was something disturbing about the idea of occupying a space that had belonged to a woman who had died tragically. But there was something more, something she couldn't name, but that made her feel as if, somehow strange, she belonged to that place. As if this weren't the first time she had stepped into that house, that library, that life. As the sun set over the vineyards, painting the sky in orange tones that reflected in the windows of the main mansion, Claire prepared for the first night in a new life that, without her knowing, was already irrevocably intertwined with secrets that not even Victor Ravenswood fully understood. The educational project that had brought her there was real, but what awaited her was far from any pedagogical program she could imagine. Claire woke the next morning with the strange sensation of having dreamed of familiar voices, fragments of conversations she couldn't completely remember, like echoes of a memory that wasn't hers. The guest house was silent, bathed by the golden light of dawn that entered through the library windows and created luminous patterns on the wooden floor. She got up slowly, still wrapped in the unusual comfort of having slept in the softest bed she had ever experienced. Egyptian cotton sheets, feather pillows, a mattress that seemed to have been custom-made for her body. It was a luxury she had never imagined she could experience, and it made her feel simultaneously grateful and displaced. She put on a silk robe she found in the closet of the master bedroom, a feminine robe that clearly wasn't new but fit her perfectly. There was something disturbing about that perfect fit, as if the piece had been left there specifically for her. Looking at herself in the bathroom mirror, Claire had a moment of vertigo. For an instant she seemed to see someone else in the reflection, a woman with lighter hair, slightly different eyes, but with the same expression of someone who wakes up in a place that seems both familiar and strange at the same time. Breakfast awaited her in the kitchen, prepared by invisible hands. Fresh bread, homemade jams, fruit from the property, freshly brewed coffee whose aroma filled the entire house. A handwritten note with masculine and firm handwriting was leaning against the porcelain cup. "I hope you slept well. Until tonight. V." Claire held the note for a long moment, analyzing the handwriting. There was something in the way the letters curved, especially in the final V, that awakened an inexplicable familiarity, as if she had seen that handwriting before, perhaps in dreams, perhaps somewhere her conscious mind couldn't access. After breakfast, she decided to explore the surroundings of the house. The Ravenswood property stretched across gentle hills covered with vines, arranged in perfect rows. It was early July, summer in California, and the fresh morning air carried the aroma of moist earth and leaves that were beginning to turn golden. Claire walked along the Portuguese stone paths that connected different areas of the property, passing by a small chapel of Spanish architecture, an underground cellar whose stone entrance was partially covered by ivy, and finally arriving at a glass greenhouse that seemed to have been abandoned for years. The greenhouse aroused her curiosity. It was an elegant construction, with cast-iron structure painted green and glass panels that, even foggy with time, still allowed a view of the interior filled with plants that grew wildly. The door was unlocked, as if someone had passed through there recently, but the interior had the stuffy air of a place long closed. Inside the greenhouse, Claire found a secret garden. Old roses that continued to bloom despite abandonment, rare orchids that hung from wooden supports, and plants she couldn't identify, but which created an almost magical environment. In the center of the greenhouse, there was a small improvised studio, easels with unfinished canvases, brushes still stiff with dried paint, tubes of paint squeezed and abandoned. The canvases immediately caught her attention. They were landscapes of the property, but painted with an emotional intensity that transcended mere representation. The vineyards seemed to undulate with their own life. The sky was loaded with dramatic clouds that suggested internal storms, and there was a dreamlike quality in the colors that made Claire feel as if she were looking at the world through the eyes of someone who saw layers of reality invisible to others. One of the canvases was turned against the wall. Claire hesitated before turning it, but curiosity was stronger. When she finally turned it, her heart stopped. It was a self-portrait, a woman with blonde hair and green eyes, painted with brushstrokes that revealed both talent and torment. But it wasn't the artist's talent that shocked Claire. It was the expression on the painted face, an expression of deep melancholy, of someone who carried secrets too heavy to bear alone. And there was something more, something that made Claire sit heavily on a bench near the easel. The woman in the painting had her hands, exactly her hands. The same lines, the same shape of the fingers, even the small scar on the right index finger that Claire had carried since childhood, when she had cut herself trying to help her mother in the kitchen. She looked at her own hands, then at the painting, then again at her hands. It was impossible, it was a coincidence, it had to be. People could have similar hands, but that scar... A noise at the entrance of the greenhouse made her turn quickly. Victor was standing at the door, observing her with an expression that mixed surprise and something she couldn't identify. Fear, recognition, pain. "I'm sorry," she said, standing up quickly. "I shouldn't be here." The door was open and I... "Don't apologize," he interrupted, entering the greenhouse with careful steps as if he were walking on sacred territory. He wore dark jeans and a white linen shirt that enhanced his natural tan. There was something different about him today. Less formal than at the auction, but also more vulnerable. Alice spent a lot of time here. It was the place where she felt most herself. Claire looked again at the self-portrait, trying to process the information. She was very talented. She was. Victor approached the painting, but without looking directly at it. Instead, he observed Claire, as if he were looking for something in her face. "You look like her." The words hung in the greenhouse air like a dangerous confession. Claire felt her heart race. "People say I have a common face. There's nothing common about you." The intensity in his voice made her look directly at him. Victor was closer now, and she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the fatigue he carried like a second skin, the way his lips curved slightly downward even when he wasn't sad. "From the moment I saw you at the auction, He stopped abruptly, as if he had said more than he intended. "You what?" Claire asked, her voice coming out lower than she expected. Victor looked away, finally focusing on Alice's self-portrait. "I thought I was seeing ghosts." They stood in silence for a long moment, both looking at the painting, both feeling the weight of something unsaid. Claire wanted to ask about the hands in the painting, about the strange feeling of familiarity that place awakened in her, about the real reason why he had brought her to the property. But there was something in Victor's posture that suggested fragility, as if he were balancing on the edge of an emotional precipice. "Come," he said finally, "let me show you the rest of the property. And tonight we'll talk about the educational project." They left the greenhouse together, but Claire looked back one last time. Alice's self-portrait seemed to be watching her, and for a terrible moment she had the impression that the painted eyes moved, following her. The rest of the day passed in a careful exploration of the property. Victor proved to be a knowledgeable and attentive guide, explaining the history of the Ravenswood family, the viticulture techniques they had perfected over 3 generations, the challenges of maintaining a family business in an increasingly competitive market. But Claire noticed that he was avoiding certain areas of the property, always directing her away from the main mansion and a smaller building she spotted in the distance, half hidden among eucalyptus trees. During lunch, served on a side veranda of the guest house, Claire tried to approach the subject of the educational project. The letter mentioned a partnership with universities in San Francisco and Los Angeles. "When will we start working with the other researchers?" Victor carefully cut a piece of artisanal cheese before answering. "The project is in an initial phase of development. For now, you will be responsible for structuring the base methodology. The other collaborators will join later. There was something evasive in his response that made Claire frown. And Dr. Beatrice Sanders, she mentioned in the call that she would like to meet me in person. She's traveling for work, but she'll be back soon. Victor took a sip of wine, avoiding her gaze. For now, we'll have time to get to know each other better, to understand how you work, what your preferred methodologies are. Claire nodded, but part of her was beginning to question the true nature of the project. There was something too organized, too convenient in the way everything had fit together, as if someone had carefully orchestrated every detail to bring her there. In the afternoon, she spent time alone in the library of the guest house trying to organize her thoughts. She picked up one of the Virginia Woolf volumes that Victor had mentioned and began to read To the Lighthouse, but her mind kept returning to the self-portrait in the greenhouse. Those hands identical to hers couldn't be a coincidence. But what was the alternative? That Alice Ravenswood had somehow known her, that they had some relationship she was unaware of? Claire tried to remember any connection between her family and the Sonoma Valley region. Her parents were from Mendocino, born and raised in the city. She had never heard of the Ravenswoods before the auction. But there were gaps in her memory, especially from the early years of adolescence when she went through a difficult period after the death of her maternal grandmother. Perhaps there was something there she had forgotten. Dinner was scheduled for 8 at the main mansion. Claire got ready carefully, choosing a navy blue dress she had brought for special occasions, but which now seemed inadequate for a dinner with a man like Victor Ravenswood. Her hair was loose, falling in soft waves over her shoulders, and she used only a discreet lipstick and a little mascara. The main mansion at night was even more impressive than during the day. Golden lights illuminated the Spanish colonial facade, and the front garden was dotted with small lanterns that created a romantic path to the main entrance. Claire was received by an elegant middle-aged woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Carmen, housekeeper of the house for 15 years. "Mr. Victor awaits you in the dining room," said Mrs. Carmen, leading Claire through corridors decorated with family portraits and antique furniture that seemed to have been brought directly from Spain. "He asked me to prepare something special tonight." The dining room was intimate despite its size. A solid wood table for 12 had been set for only 2, with candles, crystal and porcelain dishes that Claire suspected were family heirlooms. Victor was waiting for her standing near a lit fireplace, wearing a dark suit without a tie, the first buttons of the white shirt open. He was holding a glass of red wine, and there was another waiting for her on the table. "You look beautiful," he said when she entered, and the sincerity in his voice made her blush slightly. "Thank you. This house is impressive. It was built by my great-grandfather in 1895 when he arrived from Italy. Each generation added something of its own." Victor led her to the chair, pulling it out for her to sit. His fingers brushed lightly on her shoulders when he helped her sit down, and Claire felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Dinner was served in several stages. Appetizer of artisanal cheeses and meats produced on the property, pumpkin soup with spices that warmed Claire inside, risotto with wild mushrooms that melted in the mouth, and a lamb fillet that was cooked to perfection. Each dish was accompanied by a different wine from the Ravenswood cellar, and Victor patiently explained the characteristics of each one, the history behind the production, the nuances that a trained palate could detect. Claire discovered she had a natural aptitude for tasting wines. She could identify flavors and aromas that Victor mentioned, and her observations impressed him. "How you have an educated palate," he commented after she precisely described the fruity notes of a 2018 Merlot. "I never had the opportunity to develop that before," she admitted. "At home, wine was something for special occasions, and even then, the cheapest one. Palate has nothing to do with formal education or money," said Victor. "It's intuition, sensitivity." "You have both." The conversation flowed naturally between them. Claire talked about her childhood in Mendocino, about the passion for literature she had discovered as a child, about the challenges of teaching in a public school with few resources. Victor shared memories of the property, family stories that had been passed down from generation to generation, his years studying business in New York, and how he had reluctantly taken over the business when his father suffered a heart attack at 55. But there were gaps in both narratives. Claire noticed that Victor avoided talking about Alice, and she herself found herself omitting details about her relationship with Julian, about the difficult months that preceded her arrival there, about the growing feeling that her previous life had been just a preparation for this moment. It was during dessert, a delicate tiramisu accompanied by a port wine, that the tension between them became palpable. Claire had drunk more wine than she was used to and felt relaxed in a way she hadn't experienced in months. Victor was closer now, having moved his chair to her side of the table, when Mrs. Carmen brought the digestive. "May I ask a personal question?" asked Claire, her inhibitions slightly reduced by the alcohol. "Of course. Why did you really bring me here? I don't believe it's just for an educational project." Victor was silent for a long moment, turning the port wine glass between his hands. When he finally looked at her, his eyes were loaded with an intensity that made her hold her breath. "Because since Alice died, I couldn't feel anything anymore. It was as if a part of me had died with her. And then I saw you at the auction, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt something." He paused, struggling with the words. "You made me remember that I'm still alive." Claire felt her heart race. There was something dangerous in that confession, something that promised complications she wasn't sure she was prepared to face. "Victor, I know it's crazy," he continued, leaning slightly toward her. "I know you barely know me, that there's a world of difference between us, but I couldn't let you go without understanding what it meant." "What you mean?" The raw sincerity in his voice hit Claire like a wave. She could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the way he exposed himself despite the obvious fear of rejection, and she herself felt something growing inside her chest, an attraction that went beyond the physical, a connection that seemed to transcend the time they had known each other. "And what do I mean?" she asked, her voice coming out hoarser than intended. Instead of answering with words, Victor extended his hand and gently touched her face. His fingers traced the line of her cheek, went down to her chin, and Claire found herself leaning against the touch. There was something hypnotic in the way he looked at her, as if he were memorizing every detail of her face. "You mean hope," he said finally, "something I thought I had lost forever." The kiss that followed was inevitable. It started soft, almost hesitant, but quickly deepened when Claire responded, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. He tasted like wine and something darker, more complex. It was a kiss loaded with emotional hunger, of 3 years of loneliness and pain dissolving in the heat of the present moment. When they separated, both were breathing heavily. Claire could feel her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. Victor rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if he were savoring the moment. "Claire," he murmured, and there were so many unspoken things in how he pronounced her name. "I know," she replied, though she didn't know exactly what she was agreeing to. She only knew that something fundamental had changed between them, that an invisible line had been crossed and there was no going back. Victor moved away slightly, studying her face. "Are you sure? Because if we're together tonight, everything changes, and I can't promise it will be easy." Claire thought about the life she had left behind in Mendocino, the months of loneliness and pain that preceded that moment, the feeling of finally being in the right place for the first time in years. "I don't want it to be easy," she said. "I want it to be real." He took her in his arms then, carrying her from the dining room through the corridors of the mansion to a room on the 2nd floor that Claire assumed was his. It was a masculine but welcoming environment, dominated by an old carved wooden bed and windows that gave a view of the vineyards bathed by moonlight. They made love with an intensity that surprised both of them. It wasn't just physical desire, although there was plenty of that. It was as if 2 pieces of a puzzle finally fit together, as if they had been made for each other. Victor was gentle but passionate, attentive to the smallest signs of Claire's pleasure, and she gave herself completely, allowing herself to be vulnerable in a way she hadn't been able to for years. Afterward, lying between rumpled sheets, Claire traced lazy circles on Victor's chest while he played with her hair. The reality of what they had done was beginning to settle in, but instead of regret, she felt a sense of completeness she hadn't experienced in a long time. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice hoarse with sleep and satisfaction. "About how all this seems surreal," she admitted, "as if I were living someone else's life." Victor tensed for a moment, but then relaxed. "Sometimes life surprises us. Sometimes good things happen when we least expect them." Claire turned to look at him, supporting herself on her elbow. In the soft moonlight coming through the windows, He looked younger, the lines of worry on his face softened by post-love relaxation. What if someone finds out? What if people talk? Let them talk. His fingers found hers, intertwining. I spent 3 years dead inside. I'm not going to waste the chance to live again because of what others might think. They fell asleep intertwined, but Claire woke in the middle of the night with the strange sensation that she was being watched. Victor was sleeping deeply beside her, a possessive arm around her waist, but she felt restless. She got up carefully, put on one of his shirts that was thrown on a nearby chair, and went to the window. The vineyard stretched under the silver light of the moon, creating patterns of shadow and light that seemed to move even without wind. But it wasn't the landscape that caught her attention. It was a solitary figure walking among the rows of grapes, so distant that it was almost a shadow. A female figure, with long hair that seemed to float around her shoulders. Claire blinked several times, thinking she must be dreaming, but when she looked again, the figure had disappeared. Only the silent vineyards and the moon watching everything with its cold light. She returned to bed, nestling against the warmth of Victor's body, but it took her a long time to fall back asleep. Something had changed in the night air, as if the Ravenswood property held secrets that were only beginning to reveal themselves, and Claire couldn't shake the feeling that the figure she had seen in the vineyards had something to do with her, in a way her conscious mind still couldn't understand. When she finally fell asleep, she dreamed of a blonde woman painting in a studio full of light, while a familiar voice whispered her name. But in the dream, it wasn't Claire who was being called. It was another name, a name she knew but couldn't remember upon waking, a name that sounded like home, like memory, like secret. Claire woke up alone in Victor's bed, wrapped in the masculine smell of the sheets and the golden morning light filtering through the linen curtains. Her body still carried the memory of the previous night, each touch, each kiss engraved on her skin like a precious reminder. But along with the physical satisfaction came a restlessness she couldn't name, something that moved in the pit of her stomach like a warning. She found a note on the pillow next to hers, written in the same firm handwriting she had recognized at breakfast the day before. Urgent meeting with company lawyers back before lunch. Feel free to explore the house. V. Claire dressed slowly, using her own clothes that had been carefully folded on a chair. Someone, probably Mrs. Carman, had entered the room during the night to organize the pieces scattered on the floor. The idea that the housekeeper knew exactly what had happened left her slightly embarrassed, but there was a greater sense of belonging, as if she were finally where she should be. The mansion during the day was even more impressive than at night. Claire descended the carved wooden stairs, observing the family portraits that lined the way. Men with full mustaches and 19th-century suits, elegant women in period dresses, serious children posing formally. But it was a smaller portrait, almost hidden among the larger ones, that made her stop abruptly. It was Alice Ravenswood, but in a younger version. She must have been about 20 in the photograph, and she wore a simple white dress, her blonde hair loose over her shoulders. It wasn't Alice's classic beauty that shocked Claire, but the expression in her eyes. It was the same expression Claire saw in the mirror when she felt lost, when she questioned who she really was behind the masks she wore to survive in the world. She was beautiful, wasn't she? Mrs. Carman's voice surprised her. The housekeeper had approached silently, carrying a tray with coffee and fresh bread. Very, agreed Claire, unable to take her eyes off the photograph. This photo was taken shortly after she arrived here. Mr. Victor met her at an art gallery in San Francisco when she was still a student. Mrs. Carman paused, studying Claire's face carefully. Sometimes I think souls meet more than once in this life. There was something in the way the housekeeper said this that made Claire shiver. What do you mean by that? Nothing, dear. Just the ramblings of an old woman. Mrs. Carman smiled, but there was something enigmatic in her eyes. Mr. Victor left instructions for you to have breakfast in the library. He said there are some special books he would like you to see. Claire followed Mrs. Carman to the library of the main mansion, an environment even more impressive than that of the guest house. Mahogany shelves extended from floor to ceiling, filled with volumes that seemed to have been collected over generations. There was a reading table in the center of the room where coffee had been prepared, and on it a pile of carefully selected books. After Mrs. Carman withdrew, Claire examined the volumes. They were all related to psychological literature and the study of the mind. Young Freud, works on memory and identity, theories about reincarnation and past lives. There were also some more specific books about dissociative disorders and traumatic amnesia. Why did Victor want her to see this? Claire opened one of the books on traumatic amnesia and came across several underlined passages. One in particular caught her attention. In cases of severe trauma, especially in adolescence, the mind can create memory blocks so deep that entire episodes of life can be forgotten or reinterpreted. The subject may create a new identity to deal with experiences that the psyche considers unbearable. A sheet of paper had been used as a page marker. Claire pulled it out and immediately recognized Victor's handwriting. "Claire, there are things about your past that you may not remember. Don't be afraid. We're in this together. V." Claire's heart raced. What things about her past? What kind of trauma did Victor think she had suffered? And why did he seem to know more about her own life than she did? She closed the book abruptly and decided to explore the rest of the house. There was something in that whole situation that was beginning to seem too orchestrated, too planned. The educational project that had brought her there seemed increasingly like a farce. And now Victor was insinuating that she had memory problems she didn't even know about. Claire went up to the second floor of the mansion, passing through elegantly decorated rooms that clearly hadn't been used for years. Everything was impeccably clean, but there was a museum quality to the environment, as if real life had been suspended at some point in the past. It was in a more distant corridor that she found a door different from the others. While all the other rooms had dark wood doors with bronze doorknobs, this one was painted white and had a modern lock. Claire tried to turn it, but it was locked. "That was Alice's room," said a voice behind her. Claire turned quickly. Mrs. Carman was at the end of the corridor, observing her with an expression that mixed understanding and something that seemed like pity. "Mr. Victor locked it after she died. Said he couldn't go in there." The housekeeper approached, taking a bunch of keys from her apron. "But perhaps it's time for someone to enter." "Mrs. Carman, I don't think—" "You need to see," interrupted the older woman, selecting a specific key, "to understand who you really are." The door opened with a soft click, revealing a room that seemed to have been preserved in time. It was clearly feminine, decorated in blue and white tones, with delicate furniture and windows that gave a view to the greenhouse where Claire had found the paintings the day before. But it wasn't the decoration that shocked her. It was the photographs. They covered an entire wall of the room. Hundreds of photographs of Alice at different moments in her life. Alice as a child, Alice as a teenager, Alice as a young adult. And in the middle of all of them, as if they were part of the same chronological sequence, there were photographs of Claire. Claire at 14 in a photo she didn't remember taking. Claire at 16, smiling on a beach she didn't recognize. Claire at 18 wearing a dress she had never owned. And many others, documenting years of her life that seemed to have been erased from her memory. "My God," she whispered, approaching the wall. "How is this possible?" Mrs. Carman stood at the door observing Claire's reaction with sad eyes. Alice began collecting these photos 2 years before she died. She said she had found her spiritual twin sister, that you two were part of the same soul. Claire touched one of her photos, one in which she appeared in a garden that seemed familiar, but that she couldn't locate in her memory. "But I don't know these places, I don't remember any of these photos." "Alice said you had forgotten. That something terrible happened, and your mind blocked the memories to protect you." Mrs. Carman entered the room, heading to an antique desk near the window. She wrote about it, left letters, diaries, everything documented. The housekeeper opened a drawer of the desk and took out an ornate wooden box. Inside were dozens of handwritten letters, additional photographs, and what appeared to be pages from a diary. "Alice believed that you met when you were teenagers at a place called Hope Institute, a psychiatric clinic that operated here in the region between 1998 and 2005. Mrs. Carman held one of the letters, but didn't immediately give it to Claire. "She said you spent 2 years there, that you became inseparable, that you promised never to forget each other." Claire felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. Hope Institute. The name awakened something deep in her mind, like a distant echo of an almost forgotten nightmare. "That's impossible. I was never in a psychiatric clinic. You were 15 when you were admitted. Your parents said you had suffered a nervous breakdown after the death of your grandmother, but Alice discovered that there was more to it than that. Mrs. Carman finally handed the letter to Claire. "Read." With trembling hands, Claire unfolded the paper and immediately recognized Alice's delicate handwriting. "My dear Claire, if you're reading this, it means we've finally met again, even if you don't remember me. I know your mind erased those 2 years at the Institute, and perhaps it's better that way. What they did to us there shouldn't have happened to anyone. You arrived in the winter of 2001, just a frightened girl who cried every night calling for your grandmother. I had already been there for 6 months after my parents discovered my suicide attempt. We became sisters, more than sisters. We shared everything, fears, dreams, even our nightmares. Dr. Henry Matthews was the director. He used us as guinea pigs for his experiments on memory transfer and shared identity. He said that spiritual twins like us could share consciousnesses, that he could make us one person if he wanted. The sessions took place in the basement, with drugs and hypnosis. Sometimes I would wake up with your memories in my head. Sometimes you would wake up talking as if you were me. When we left there in 2003, we swore we would never forget each other. But you forgot everything. Your mind completely blocked those 2 years. I remember everything, and I carried the memories of both of us all these years. Now that Victor has brought you here, I know it's not a coincidence. He doesn't know about our connection, but something greater than the two of us is bringing us together again. Perhaps it's time for the truth to come out. With eternal love, Alice." Claire let the letter fall to the floor, her legs giving way until she sat heavily in a nearby armchair. Fragments of memories began to emerge like bubbles, rising to the surface of dark water, white corridors, the smell of disinfectant, a blonde girl holding her hand during storms, voices whispering her name in the dark. "No," she murmured. "This can't be real." Mrs. Carman knelt beside the armchair, gently holding Claire's hands. "Dear, Alice spent 3 years looking for you after she left the clinic. She hired private investigators, tracked medical records, did everything she could. When she finally discovered where you were, she was afraid to appear directly in your life. She thought it would be too traumatic. So she married Victor and... what? Waited for me to magically appear? She fell in love with Victor for real. But she also knew he had resources, connections, power to help her find you the right way. When she died, she left instructions for Victor to continue looking. That's why you're here." Claire stood up abruptly, walking to the window. Down below, she could see the greenhouse where she had found Alice's paintings the day before. "Does Victor know all this? He knows that Alice had an obsession with a girl from her past, but he doesn't know about the experiments, about what you went through together. Alice never had the courage to tell him everything." At that moment, Claire heard footsteps in the corridor. Victor was coming up the stairs, probably returning early from the meeting. Mrs. Carman quickly put the letters back in the box, but left some photographs scattered on the desk. "Don't tell him we were here," she whispered. "Let him show you himself when he's ready." Claire nodded, but her mind was in turmoil. When Victor appeared at the door of Alice's room, he found Claire standing near the wall of photographs, observing the images that documented a life she didn't remember having lived. "Claire," he said, his voice loaded with surprise and something that could be relief. "You found it. Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, without turning to look at him. "Why all this staging with the educational project, with the lies?" Victor entered the room slowly, as if he were entering sacred territory. "Because I didn't know how you would react. Alice made me promise that if we ever found you, it would be done carefully. She said your memories were blocked for a reason." Claire finally turned to him. Victor was different, less controlled than in previous days. There was a vulnerability in his eyes that she hadn't seen before, as if he too were discovering truths that frightened him. "So all this was planned? The auction, the meeting, the attraction between us?" "The auction was planned. I knew your journalist friend would be there, and Alice had discovered that you were close. Arranging for her to bring you was easy." Victor approached slowly, but maintained a respectful distance. "But the attraction between us, that was real. That caught me completely by surprise." Claire looked again at the photographs on the wall. There were so many of them, documenting years of a life that seemed to have been lived by someone else. "Alice was watching me for years. She was protecting you," corrected Victor. "She discovered that the man you were living with, Julian, had also been at Hope Institute. She thought he might be trying to awaken your memories in a violent way." Julian's name hit Claire like a punch in the stomach. What did you say? Julian Farris, your ex-partner. He was a patient at Hope Institute at the same time as you two. Alice discovered this 6 months ago and panicked. She thought it wasn't a coincidence that he had approached you. Claire sat heavily on Alice's bed, processing the information. Julian, whom she had met at a party of mutual friends 3 years ago. Julian, who had always shown excessive interest in her childhood, asking questions about her adolescence that she could never answer. Julian, who had become progressively more controlling, more violent, as if he were trying to break some resistance within her. Alice died a week before getting the legal resources to keep him away from you, continued Victor. She was working with lawyers, psychologists, building a case to protect you. Her death wasn't an accident. His words echoed in the silent room like an emotional bomb. Claire raised her eyes to Victor, seeing in them a deep pain that finally made sense. You think Alice was murdered? I think Alice discovered something that someone didn't want her to discover. And I think Julian may be involved. Victor approached and sat on the bed beside her, but without touching her. That's why I brought you here. To protect you. To understand what Alice was investigating. Claire held one of her photographs, one in which she appeared smiling next to Alice in a place that looked like a hospital garden. The two girls looked happy, despite the clinical environment in the background. Why can't I remember any of this? Because your mind is protecting you from something that was too traumatic to process. Victor finally touched her hand, gently. But perhaps it's time to remember, to understand who you really are, to understand what Alice died trying to protect. At that moment, Claire's phone rang. It was a number she recognized, but didn't expect to see. Julian. She showed the screen to Victor, who immediately tensed. Don't answer. But Claire had already pressed the button. Hello? Claire, my love. Julian's voice was soft, affectionate, as it always was at the beginning of his manipulative advances. I miss you so much. Where are you? That's none of your business, Julian. You shouldn't be calling me. Don't be like that, darling. I just want to make sure you're okay. I heard you're at a vineyard in the countryside, with an older man. There was a subtle change in tone, a veiled threat that she knew well. That doesn't seem like a good idea. Claire felt her blood freeze. How did he know where she was? Julian, I already said I don't want any more contact with you. Claire, you don't understand. There are things about you that you don't know, things about your past that only I can explain. His voice became more urgent, almost desperate. This man you're with, he's not who you think. He's using you, Claire, just like she used you. She who? Alice Ravenswood, the woman who died. She was obsessed with you, Claire. She followed you, photographed you, planned to kidnap you. I was trying to protect you from her. Claire looked at Victor, who was listening to the conversation with a somber expression. You're lying. Come home, Claire. Come back to me and I'll explain everything. About the Institute, about what they did to you, about why you don't remember. I'm the only person who really knows you. The call was abruptly cut off. Claire stood looking at the phone, her hands trembling. Julian knew about the Institute. Julian knew about Alice. Julian knew where she was. We have to get out of here, said Victor, standing up quickly. If he knows where you are, it's not safe. But Claire didn't move. She was looking at a specific photograph she had picked up from the desk. It was her and Alice, but not alone. There was a third teenager in the image, a boy with dark hair and intense eyes who smiled strangely at the camera. It was Julian, younger, but unmistakably him. Victor, she said, her voice coming out as a whisper. I think we were all at Hope Institute, Alice, me and Julian, and I think something very terrible happened there. Something someone would kill to keep secret. Victor took the photograph from her hands, and when he saw the boy's face, his expression hardened. Then, we don't have much time. If Julian is coming after you, it's because someone sent him. And if someone sent him, it's because you represent a threat. A threat to whom? To whoever was behind the experiments at Hope Institute. To whoever has something to lose if the truth comes out. Victor held her hands, forcing her to look him in the eyes. Claire, you're not just a victim of those experiments. You're a witness. And someone is very willing to do anything to silence you. Outside the room, Claire could hear the distant sound of a car coming up the property road. Victor heard it too, and his expression became grave. He's already here, he murmured. Claire stood up, feeling a strange determination growing within her. For years she had lived with the feeling that her life wasn't completely hers, that there were gaps in her identity that she couldn't fill. Now, finally, she had clues about who she really was, and she wasn't going to let Julian or anyone else prevent her from discovering the truth. "Then let's face him," she said. "Together." Victor smiled for the first time since they entered Alice's room. "Alice always said you were brave, braver than you knew." They left the room hand in hand, ready to face a past that had been buried for a long time, but which now emerged like a ghost thirsty for revenge. And Claire knew, with a certainty that came from somewhere deep in her soul, that her life would never be the same again. The Ravenswood property, which had seemed like a refuge, now revealed itself as the stage for a confrontation that had begun 15 years ago in a psychiatric clinic and would finally come to an end, or destroy all those involved in the process. The sound of the car coming up the property road echoed like a death sentence in the silence of the afternoon. Claire and Victor quickly descended the stairs, passing by the family portraits that now seemed to observe them with judging expressions. Mrs. Carman appeared in the main hall, holding a dish towel in her trembling hands, her eyes revealing that she too had heard the vehicle approaching. "It must be Mr. Julian," she said, her voice loaded with concern. "Alice always said he would come one day." Victor stopped abruptly. "Alice talked about him?" "In the last months before she died, she kept saying that he would come for her. She never said the name, but I knew she was terrified. Mrs. Carman looked through the side window, where it was possible to see a black sedan approaching the mansion. She locked all the documents about the institute in a safe in the office, said that if anything happened to her, I should deliver everything to the police. "Where is this safe?" asked Claire, her voice coming out firmer than she expected. "In Mr. Victor's private office, behind the painting of the great-grandfather." Victor nodded grimly. "Mrs. Carman, go to the staff house and lock yourself in there. Call the police if we don't leave this house in an hour." The housekeeper hesitated, looking at Claire with maternal eyes. "Dear, perhaps it would be better for you to come with me. This man, there's something very wrong with him." Claire felt a wave of fragmented memories crossing her mind. Julian at 17, smiling strangely while other teenagers screamed in the background. Julian holding her hand too tightly during a session she couldn't completely remember. Julian whispering things in her ear that made her skin crawl with fear. "No," she said, surprising herself with the determination in her voice. "I need to face him. I need to know the truth." The sound of a car door slamming echoed in the courtyard. Firm footsteps approached the main entrance. Mrs. Carman quickly withdrew through the back door, but not before squeezing Claire's hand in a silent demonstration of support. Victor positioned himself between Claire and the main door, but she stopped him with a touch on the arm. "Let me speak to him first. If he's here because of me, I need to understand what he wants." 3 firm knocks echoed on the massive wooden door. Victor took a deep breath and opened it, revealing Julian Farris on the threshold. He had changed in the month since Claire had left him. He was thinner, with deep dark circles that suggested sleepless nights, and his brown hair was longer, slightly disheveled. But it was his eyes that disturbed her most. There was an intensity in them that she didn't remember, as if he were seeing things that others couldn't see. "Claire," he said, completely ignoring Victor, "are you okay? When I couldn't reach you by phone, I got worried." "You shouldn't be here, Julian," she replied, keeping a safe distance. "I made it clear that our relationship is over." Julian smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. There was something predatory in it, as if he knew a secret she was unaware of. "Our relationship could never end, Claire. Not after everything we've been through together. Not after what you owe me." Victor stepped forward. "I think you'd better leave. Claire has made her position clear." It was then that Julian finally looked at Victor, and his expression completely transformed. "Ah, yes, the inconsolable widower. Tell me, Mr. Ravenswood, did your wife mention anything about medical experiments before she died? About 2 girls who were subjected to experimental treatments 15 years ago." The question hit Victor like a shot. Claire saw his hands close into fists, but he kept his voice controlled. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the project your dear Alice discovered. The real reason why she died." Julian entered the house uninvited, observing the antique furniture and family portraits with calculated interest. "She didn't fall from the veranda by accident, Mr. Ravenswood. She was pushed by someone who couldn't allow her to reveal the truth about Hope Institute." Claire felt her blood freeze. "How do you know this?" Julian turned to her, and for a moment she saw the teenager he had been, frightened, vulnerable, but also dangerously unstable. Because I was there when it happened, Claire. I saw who killed Alice, and I know you're next on the list. Victor moved quickly, placing himself between Julian and Claire. If you know who killed my wife, why didn't you go to the police? Because the police wouldn't believe it. Because the people involved are too powerful, too respected. Julian laughed, a sound that had nothing of humor. And because I also did things I'm not proud of to get here. Claire stepped forward, even with Victor trying to protect her. What kind of things? You really don't remember anything from the institute, do you? Julian studied her face with scientific attention. Dr. Matthews said this could happen, that some patients would develop selective amnesia to protect themselves from trauma. The doctor's name awakened something deep in Claire's mind. Fragments of memories began to emerge like shards of glass. A man in a white coat with small glasses and a cold smile. White rooms with strange equipment. The metallic taste of medications being forced down her throat. Dr. Henry Matthews, she whispered. I remember him. You should. He spent 2 years experimenting on you. Julian approached, ignoring Victor's evident tension. You, me, and Alice were his favorite guinea pigs. He was trying to prove a theory about consciousness transfer between people with similar traumas. Victor interrupted. Consciousness transfer? He believed that traumatized minds could share memories, experiences, even personalities. Julian looked directly at Claire. You really don't remember the sessions in the basement, the injections, the times when you would wake up speaking like Alice, or when Alice would wake up with your memories. Claire felt as if the floor were disappearing beneath her feet. Images were coming back. She and Alice lying on gurneys side by side, tubes connected to their arms. The sensation of her consciousness dissolving and mixing with another. Waking up without knowing who she was for a few terrifying minutes. Why were you there? She asked, her voice almost inaudible. Because my parents committed me after I started having violent episodes. Julian made air quotes, sarcastic. Actually, I was developing abilities that scared people. I could read thoughts, predict things that were going to happen. Doctor Matthews found that fascinating. Victor was observing the interaction with growing alarm. And what does this have to do with Alice, with Claire? It has everything to do with it, replied Julian. Dr. Matthews discovered that Claire and Alice had a natural connection. They were what he called twin souls. When he started the transfer experiments, he discovered that he could literally exchange memories between them. And I was the catalyst. Claire remembered more details. Julian was always present during the most intense sessions. He would hold her hands while the drugs took effect, whispering things she couldn't understand at the time. So you helped us, she said, the realization coming as a shock. I had no choice, exploded Julian. Dr. Matthews said that if I didn't cooperate, he would subject me to the same experiments. I was just a scared child, Claire, just like you. Victor approached Claire, placing a protective hand on her back. Even if all this is true, why are you here now? What do you want? Julian took a deep breath as if preparing for a difficult confession. Because Dr. Matthews isn't dead, because Hope Institute didn't close due to lack of funding. It was closed because someone discovered what was happening there and threatened to expose everything. Who? Asked Claire. Alice. 15 years later, when she was married to you. He looked at Victor. She began to remember more things. The memories that were implanted in her began to mix with her own, and she realized that something was very wrong. She hired investigators, found other ex-patients, started compiling a dossier. Victor was pale. Alice never told me anything about this. Because she discovered that you were indirectly financing Dr. Matthews' research. Your family, the Ravenswood Foundation, was one of the main donors to the Institute. Julian observed Victor's shocked reaction with somber satisfaction. She didn't know if she could trust you. Claire felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. Victor, is this true? Victor shook his head vigorously. I didn't know. My father controlled all the Foundation's donations at the time. He never told me about Hope Institute. Maybe, said Julian, or maybe you knew exactly what you were doing when you brought Claire here. Maybe you're part of the same conspiracy that killed Alice. The accusation hung in the air like a poison. Claire looked at Victor, looking for signs of guilt or betrayal in his eyes, but all she saw was genuine shock and deep pain. I didn't know, he repeated, looking directly at Claire. I swear by everything sacred, I didn't know about the experiments. I brought you here because Alice asked me to find you, because she said you were in danger. Julian laughed bitterly. How convenient! And I suppose it was also a coincidence that you fell in love with her. Claire stepped forward, placing herself between the two men. Enough. Julian, you said you came to warn me about a danger. What danger? Dr. Matthews discovered that Alice was investigating. He sent people to silence her, the same people who now know you're here, that your memories may be coming back. Julian held Claire's arm and she felt an electric shock at the touch. They'll try to kill you, Claire, like they killed Alice. At that moment, the sound of several cars coming up the property road cut through the air. Victor ran to the window and saw 3 black vehicles approaching rapidly. My God, he murmured. They're already here. Julian nodded grimly. Dr. Matthews doesn't come alone. He brought private security and some other ex-patients he converted over the years. Claire felt panic rise in her throat. Converted how? Brainwashing, conditioning. He transformed some of the most unstable patients into loyal soldiers. Julian quickly headed for the back door. We have to get out of here. Tao? Victor hesitated for a moment, looking at Claire. Do you trust him? Claire looked at Julian, trying to see beyond the years of fear and resentment she had built around her memories of him. There was sincerity in his desperation, an urgency that seemed genuine, and the memories that were coming back confirmed at least part of his story. Not completely, she said. But he's right about one thing. We need to get out of here. Victor nodded and ran to the office. I'll get the documents Alice hid. You go to the garage, take my car. There's no time, shouted Julian, watching through the window as armed men exited the vehicles. They've already surrounded the house. Claire saw through the window a scene that made her blood freeze. 6 men in dark clothes, clearly armed, positioned themselves strategically around the mansion, and among them an older man in a white coat, whom she immediately recognized, even after 15 years. Dr. Henry Matthews was walking toward the main door, with the same arrogant confidence she remembered from the sessions at the Institute. His hair was completely grey now, and he wore different glasses, but the cold smile was exactly the same. He's here, she whispered, feeling her legs weaken. Julian held her by the shoulders, forcing her to look him in the eyes. Claire, listen to me. Everything you remember from now on, everything you feel, may not be real. Dr. Matthews now has technology he didn't have 15 years ago. He can manipulate memories, implant thoughts, make you question your own reality. How can I know what to believe? Believe what your heart tells you. Believe in the love you feel for him, he pointed to Victor, who was running back from the office with a folder full of documents. That's real that they can't touch. 3 polite knocks echoed on the main door. The voice that followed was exactly as Claire remembered, soft, paternal, but with an underlying coldness that made her skin crawl. Claire, my dear, I know you're in there. Please, come talk to me. It's been so long since we've seen each other. Victor approached her, extending his hand. There's a secret passage in the basement that leads to the cellar. We can get out that way. But when Claire tried to move, she discovered that her legs wouldn't obey. It was as if her body had developed a conditioned response to Dr. Matthews's voice, an instinctive paralysis based on years of repressed trauma. I can't move, she whispered, panic growing in her voice. Julian nodded understandingly. It's the conditioning. It's still active after all these years. He placed his hands on the sides of Claire's face, forcing her to look at him. You're stronger than him. You always were. That's why Alice connected with you. That's why you managed to block the memories when you left there. Dr. Matthews' voice came again, closer now. Claire, I won't hurt you. I just want to talk. There are things about yourself that you need to know. Things that only I can explain. Claire closed her eyes, trying to concentrate. Memories were coming back in waves now. She saw herself at 15, thin and frightened, being led through white corridors. She remembered Alice, also young, holding her hand during painful procedures. And she remembered Julian, not as the manipulative man he had become in his adult life, but as a terrified teenager trying to survive. The memories, she murmured. They're coming back. That's good, said Victor, holding her other hand. It means you're freeing yourself from his conditioning. But Julian shook his head gravely. No. It means he's remotely activating the neural implants he put in you. Claire and Victor looked at him in shock. Implants? Small devices that he implanted in the brain of all patients. initially to monitor brain activity during experiments, but then he discovered he could use them to influence thoughts and behaviors. Julian showed a small scar behind his right ear. We all have one. Claire instinctively put her hand to the same area on her own head and felt a small bump she had never noticed before. My God! The main door exploded inward with a deafening boom. Dr. Matthews entered calmly, flanked by two armed men. He had aged but maintained the same authoritarian posture that haunted Claire's nightmares. "Hello, Claire." "Julian." His eyes fixed on Victor with clinical interest. "Mr. Ravenswood, we finally meet in person." Victor stepped forward, placing himself defensively in front of Claire. "Get out of my house." Dr. Matthews smiled. "Your house, Mr. Ravenswood?" This property was purchased with money from the Ravenswood Foundation, which in turn was funded by profits from medical patents developed from the research I conducted with these young people. He gestured to Claire and Julian. "In a sense, this house belongs to all of us." Claire found her voice, even with fear trying to silence her. "What do you want?" "I want to finish what we started 15 years ago," replied Dr. Matthews, approaching slowly. "The experiments at the Institute were just the beginning. Now I have technology to complete the consciousness transfer process. I can make you and Alice one person permanently." "Alice is dead," said Victor through clenched teeth. "Alice's body is dead," corrected Dr. Matthews. "But her consciousness, her memories, her personality, all of this was preserved in the neural implants. And now with Claire here, I can reunite the two halves of the same soul." Claire felt as if the world was spinning around her. "You're insane." "I'm visionary," he replied. "Imagine the possibilities. A person with the memories and experiences of two lives. Doubled knowledge, expanded creativity, enhanced consciousness. You would be the first of a new form of humanity." Julian stepped forward, his voice loaded with repressed anger. "And how many people have you killed to get to this point? How many ex-patients committed suicide when they started to remember?" Dr. Matthews looked at him with disdain. "Necessary sacrifices for the advancement of science. Alice died because she refused to participate voluntarily. But Claire..." He turned his attention to her. "Claire was always more cooperative." "Never," said Claire, finding strength in the anger growing within her. "I never collaborated. I was a frightened child whom you tortured." "You collaborated more than you think," said Dr. Matthews, taking a small device from his pocket. It looked like a medical remote control. "And you will collaborate again." He pressed a button, and immediately Claire felt an intense pain in her head. It wasn't just pain. It was as if her mind was being invaded, her own memories being reorganized by an external force. She fell to her knees, screaming. Victor knelt beside her, trying to help her, but he didn't know how. Julian, however, seemed to know exactly what was happening. "He's activating her implant," he shouted to Victor. "We have to destroy the control." Julian launched himself at Dr. Matthews, but one of the guards intercepted him, knocking him to the floor violently. Victor stood up to help, but the second guard pointed a gun at him. "Don't move," ordered Dr. Matthews without taking his eyes off Claire, who was writhing on the floor. "The process has already begun. In a few minutes, Claire will have access to all of Alice's memories, and then we can proceed to the final fusion of consciousnesses." Claire felt her mind being flooded with images that weren't hers. She saw herself painting in the greenhouse, but they weren't her hands holding the brushes. She remembered marrying Victor, but it was Alice who walked down the aisle. She felt love for Victor, but it was Alice's love, not her own. Or was it? The distinction was becoming impossible. Where did Claire end and Alice begin? Which memories were true and which were implanted? In the midst of the mental confusion, a familiar voice echoed in her head. It was Alice, but not as an external memory. It was as if Alice were speaking directly to her consciousness. "Claire, you need to fight. You are stronger than any of his technology. Our love for Victor is real, but your personality, your strength, your courage, all of that is yours. Don't let him steal who you are." Claire opened her eyes, seeing Victor kneeling beside her, tears streaming down his face. The pain in her head was diminishing, but not because the process was stopping. It was diminishing because she was learning to control it. "Interesting," murmured Dr. Matthews, observing the data on his device. "It seems you've developed resistance to the process. This will require a more direct approach." He signaled to the guards, who began to approach Claire and Victor. But at that moment, an explosion echoed from outside the house. The window glass trembled and car alarms began to go off. "What was that?" asked one of the guards. Dr. Matthews frowned, looking at his communication device. "External team, report in." There was no response. A second explosion, closer this time, made the entire mansion shake. And then they heard the unmistakable sound of police sirens approaching. Mrs. Carman had fulfilled her promise. Dr. Matthews looked at Claire with a mixture of frustration and admiration. "You were always special, Claire. Even as a child, there was something about you that resisted my control." He quickly headed for the door, followed by the guards. "This isn't over. I'll find you again, and next time there will be no interference." But before leaving, he pressed the button on the control one last time. Claire screamed when a new wave of pain crossed her head, but this time something different happened. Instead of being dominated by Alice's memories, she felt the two consciousnesses merging harmoniously. She was still Claire, but now she also carried Alice's strength and determination. It wasn't possession or control. It was union, complement, completeness. When the pain passed, Claire slowly stood up. Victor helped her, studying her face with concern. "Are you okay? Are you still you?" Claire smiled, gently touching his face. "I am me, but now I'm also Alice, and we both love you." Julian, who had managed to get up, observed them with a complex expression. This is how it should have been from the beginning. Not control, but choice. Not domination, but integration. The sirens were getting louder. Dr. Matthews had disappeared, but Claire knew he would return. Men like him never gave up on their obsessions. But now she was no longer alone. She had Victor, who loved her regardless of how many lives she carried. She had Alice's memories and strength to complement her own determination. And she had, surprisingly, Julian, who had proven to be more ally than enemy when it mattered. As the blue and red lights of the police illuminated the windows of the mansion, Claire knew that her life had changed forever. She was no longer just the literature teacher from Mendocino who had fled from an abusive relationship. She was no longer just the woman who had fallen in love with Victor Ravenswood at a charity auction. She was Claire Sullivan, bearer of Alice Ravenswood's memories, survivor of the Hope Institute experiments, and living witness to crimes that needed to be exposed. The fight was just beginning, but for the first time in years, she felt complete enough to face it. The hours following the confrontation with Dr. Matthews passed in a haze of sirens, interrogations, and discoveries that shook the foundations of the reality Claire thought she knew. The Ravenswood property had been transformed into an active crime scene, with officers from the County Sheriff's Department, investigators from the State Bureau of Investigation, and forensic technicians covering every inch of the mansion and surrounding grounds. Claire was sitting in the library of the mansion, a blanket over her shoulders and a cup of tea in her trembling hands, watching investigators catalogue the documents that Alice had hidden for years. Each page revealed a new layer of the conspiracy that extended far beyond Hope Institute. There were names of politicians, businessmen, respected doctors, a network of powerful people who had financed and covered up illegal medical experiments for decades. Victor was by her side, his hand finding hers whenever the weight of the revelations became unbearable. He himself was dealing with the shock of discovering that his family's fortune had been built, in part, on the suffering of vulnerable children. The profits from the medical patents developed from Dr. Matthews's research had supported various initiatives of the Ravenswood Foundation, creating a perverse cycle where crime money financed apparent charitable works. "There was no way you could have known," said Claire for the 10th time, squeezing his hand. "Your father controlled all these transactions. You were only 17 when the institute closed." Victor shook his head, his eyes fixed on a list of names that included several prominent figures in California society. "But I should have investigated better when I took over the business. I should have questioned where so much money came from." "You questioned when it mattered," intervened Julian, who was sitting in a nearby armchair with a bandage on his forehead where he had hit during the fight with Dr. Matthews' guards. "You brought Claire here when Alice asked. You helped expose all of this. In the last 3 days, Julian had revealed himself as an inexhaustible source of information about Dr. Matthews's network. He explained how, after leaving Hope Institute in 2003, he had spent years trying to rebuild his life, but always being haunted by memories of the experiments. When he finally decided to investigate on his own, he discovered that Dr. Matthews had never stopped his research. He had only made it more sophisticated and secret. "He has laboratories in at least 3 states," explained Julian to Detective Torres, a middle-aged man with graying hair who was leading the investigation. "He uses rehabilitation clinics and private psychiatric hospitals as a front. The most vulnerable patients are selected for the experiments." Detective Torres took notes meticulously. "And were the 3 of you the only survivors of the original experiments at Hope Institute?" Claire felt a wave of sadness cross her mind. Not just her own sadness, but also Alice's. The integrated memories gave her access to information she couldn't have had on her own. "No," she said slowly. "There were others. A girl named Carla Santos, who was 16. A boy, Peter Vance, 15, some older ones too." She paused, accessing memories that belonged to Alice. "Alice spent years looking for them after she left the institute." Victor looked at her with surprise. "You're remembering Alice's research?" Claire nodded. It was a strange feeling to have access to memories that weren't originally hers, but which now were part of who she was. "Alice found Carla in 2018. She was in a psychiatric clinic in Los Angeles, completely catatonic. She had been subjected to continuous experiments since she left Hope Institute." "And Peter?" asked the detective. The answer came not from Claire's mind, but from Alice's, flowing through the integrated consciousness like water. "Peter committed suicide in 2016. He left a note saying he could no longer distinguish between his own memories and those that had been implanted in him." The silence that followed was heavy. Julian lowered his head, clearly carrying guilt for having survived when others couldn't. "There's more," continued Claire, Alice's information becoming clearer. "Dr. Matthews doesn't work alone. There's an international organization involved. They call it Project Synthesis, an initiative to create human beings with expanded mental capacities through the fusion of multiple consciousnesses." Detective Torres stopped writing and looked directly at her. "How do you know this?" "Because Alice discovered it," replied Claire simply, "and now I have access to everything she discovered." It was then that Dr. Rachel Freeman, a neurologist who had been called to examine Claire, intervened in the conversation. She was a woman of about 50, with brown hair tied in a rigid bun and thin-rimmed glasses that gave her a severe but compassionate air. "What's happening with Claire is medically and scientifically fascinating," she said, consulting her notes. "The neurological exams show that she maintains her base personality intact, but there is clear evidence of integration of external memories. It's as if 2 neural libraries had been merged in a harmonious way." "Is this permanent?" asked Victor, concern evident in his voice. "We don't know," admitted Dr. Freeman. "This is completely unexplored territory in neuroscience, but from what I can observe, Claire hasn't lost anything of herself. She has only gained more." Claire stood up from her chair and walked to the library window. Outside, the property seemed different now, not just because it was full of investigators, but because she saw it through the eyes of 2 people. There were corners Claire had never explored, but that Alice knew intimately. There were memories of conversations in those gardens, of intimate moments with Victor that now were part of her own emotional experience. "It's strange," she said, speaking to everyone in the room. "I remember falling in love with Victor twice, once as Claire at the auction, another as Alice, in an art gallery in San Francisco 8 years ago." Victor approached her, gently touching her shoulder. "And how do you feel? Confused?" "Overwhelmed." Claire turned to him, and when their eyes met, she saw not just the man she had fallen in love with days ago, but also the husband Alice had loved for years. It was like seeing a painting in 2 dimensions that suddenly gained depth and texture. "Complete," she said. "For the first time in my life, I feel complete." Julian observed them from the armchair, a complex expression on his face. "This should be impossible. Dr. Matthews always said that the fusion of consciousnesses would result in madness, in loss of identity. Perhaps because he always tried to force the process," suggested Dr. Freeman. "What happened with Claire seems to have been a natural integration, facilitated by the love and emotional connection that already existed between the 2 consciousnesses." Detective Torres closed his notebook. "Well, regardless of the science behind this, we have a fugitive criminal and an international network of illegal medical experiments to dismantle." He looked directly at Claire. "Ms. Sullivan, I need you to know that your life continues to be in danger, Dr. Matthews won't give up easily. I know, replied Claire, but now I have all the information Alice collected. I know where to find the other victims, how to locate the laboratories, how to expose the entire network. That's dangerous, said Victor. These people already killed Alice. They won't hesitate to kill you too. Claire turned to him, touching his face with both hands. Victor, Alice died trying to protect all the victims of Dr. Matthews' experiments. She died trying to protect me. I can't let that have been in vain. Then we won't do this alone, he said, covering her hands with his. We have resources, we have the police, we have evidence. We'll do this the right way. Julian coughed uncomfortably. Actually, there's something you need to know. Dr. Matthews has contacts within the police. Some of the people in this room may be working for him. A tense silence settled in. Detective Torres frowned. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious reality, replied Julian. How do you think he always managed to escape investigations? How do you think he knew exactly when to come after Claire? Dr. Freeman stood up abruptly. Perhaps I should return to the hospital. I need to analyze the test results in more detail. But when she headed for the door, Claire felt something strange. A memory that wasn't hers but Alice's manifested clearly. Dr. Freeman, said Claire. Alice knew you, didn't she? The doctor stopped but didn't turn around. I don't know what you're talking about. You worked at Hope Institute, continued Claire, Alice's memories becoming clearer. You were the neurologist who monitored the experiments. Alice remembered you. Now Dr. Freeman turned and her expression had completely changed. The compassionate air had disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculated. Alice was always too perceptive for her own good, she said, just as you're being now. Detective Torres stood up quickly, his hand moving instinctively to his gun. Dr. Freeman, I need you to keep your hands where I can see them. But the doctor laughed. Detective Torres, do you really think, Dr. Matthews would flee without ensuring he had people strategically positioned? It was then that Claire realized that several of the forensic technicians who were working on the property weren't really police officers. They were Dr. Matthews' men, infiltrated into the operation from the beginning. Victor, she whispered, we need to get out of here. Now. But before they could move, Dr. Freeman took a small device from her pocket, similar to the one Dr. Matthews had used days before. Claire, dear, you're going to come with us voluntarily. Dr. Matthews is eager to continue his work. She pressed a button, and immediately Claire felt the familiar pain in her head. But this time something different happened. Instead of being dominated by the pain, she absorbed it, processed it, and transformed it. The integration with Alice's memories had done more than just give her access to information. It had made her mind more resilient, more adaptable. She could feel the electronic signal from the implant trying to manipulate her thoughts, but now she could actively resist. Interesting, murmured Dr. Freeman, observing the data on her device. It seems the fusion created an unexpected resistance. Julian stood up slowly. Claire, can you fight against this? I can do more than fight, said Claire, her voice sounding strangely harmonious, as if two people were speaking in unison. I can use this. She focused on the signal the device was sending and somehow managed to reverse it. Instead of receiving commands, she began sending her own neural waves back through the system. Dr. Freeman screamed and dropped the device, which began to emit sparks. How is this possible? Because you underestimated what Alice and I are together, replied Claire. At that moment, the library door exploded inward, but it wasn't Dr. Matthews' men who entered. It was a group of federal agents, led by a woman in military uniform whom Claire recognized from Alice's memories. Major Sandra Cunningham, FBI, announced the woman. Everyone on the ground now. What followed was controlled chaos. The fake forensic technicians were quickly subdued and arrested. Dr. Freeman tried to escape through the window, but was intercepted by agents who had surrounded the property. When the confusion calmed down, Major Cunningham approached Claire, Victor, and Julian, who were hugging in a corner of the library. Alice Ravenswood contacted us 6 months ago, she explained. She knew her life was in danger, so she created a contingency plan. If anything happened to her, I should protect Claire Sullivan at any cost. Claire felt tears streaming down her face. Even in death, Alice continued to protect her. How did you know we were in danger? Asked Victor. We've been monitoring Dr. Matthews' communications for weeks, replied Major Cunningham. When he decided to move against you, we moved against him. Was he captured? Asked Julian. Major Cunningham shook her head. Unfortunately, no, but we managed to dismantle 3 of his laboratories and arrest 12 members of his network. And now we have you 3 as living witnesses. Claire stood up, feeling a determination that came from both herself and Alice. I want to help. I want to find the other victims, expose the entire operation. This will be dangerous, warned Major Cunningham. Dr. Matthews won't give up while you're alive. Then we'll have to ensure he's captured before he can try again, said Victor, positioning himself beside Claire. What resources do you have? We have an international task force working on the case, explained Major Cunningham. But we need more information about the structure of the network, about how they operate. Claire closed her eyes, accessing Alice's memories. It was like navigating a giant mental library where each memory was carefully catalogued and accessible. Alice discovered that there's a hierarchy, she said. Dr. Matthews isn't the leader of the operation. He answers to someone higher, someone with enough resources and political power to keep everything running for decades. Who? Asked Major Cunningham. Claire hesitated. The information was there, in Alice's memories, but it was so shocking that she could hardly believe it. Senator Robert Castellani, she said finally. He not only finances the operations, he is one of the main beneficiaries of the experiments. Major Cunningham paled. Senator Castellani, he's the chairman of the Senate Health Committee. And also, added Claire, Alice's memories becoming clearer, he's one of Dr. Matthews' patients. He was subjected to neural rejuvenation processes using consciousnesses extracted from younger victims. The silence that followed was absolute. The revelation that one of the country's most powerful politicians was involved not just in the financing, but also as a direct beneficiary of the experiments, completely changed the nature of the investigation. This means we have to be even more careful, said Major Cunningham. Senator Castellani has resources and influence to make you disappear permanently. Julian stood up, a determined expression on his face. Then we have to move quickly, before he realizes we know. Victor held Claire's hand. Are you sure you want to do this? After everything you've already been through? Claire looked at him, and at that moment she wasn't just Claire Sullivan, the teacher from Mendocino who had fallen in love with a vintner. She was also Alice Ravenswood, the artist who had dedicated the last years of her life to exposing a terrible conspiracy. She was both, integrated and strengthened by the union. Alice died for this, she said. Other children died or were destroyed because of this. I can't live knowing I have the power to stop this and chose to do nothing. Victor nodded, bringing her hand to his lips. Then we'll do this together. Alice and you and I, all of us. Major Cunningham approached. We have safe houses where you can stay while we plan the operation. But I need you to understand. Once we decide to expose this, there will be no going back. You'll be in danger for the rest of your lives, or until we manage to dismantle the entire network. Claire looked through the library window, seeing the vineyards she now knew through the eyes of 2 people. This place had been her refuge, the location where she had discovered love and the truth about herself. Leaving it would be painful, but there were other people out there, other victims like Carla Santos, other experiments being conducted at that very moment, other children being tortured in the name of science. When do we leave? She asked. Major Cunningham smiled for the first time since she had arrived. Tomorrow at dawn. We have evidence to collect and people to protect. That night, Claire and Victor walked through the vineyards under the moonlight, knowing it would be the last time for a long time. The property was under federal protection, but they couldn't return until Dr. Matthews' entire network was dismantled. Any regrets? Asked Victor, stopping near the place where they had kissed for the first time. Claire turned to him, touching his face tenderly. About meeting you, about falling in love with you, about discovering who I really am. Never. And about having Alice's memories, about carrying this responsibility. Claire smiled, a smile that was both hers and Alice's. Alice gave me more than memories, Victor. She gave me courage, she gave me purpose. She gave me the ability to love you in a way I never could have alone. They kissed then, under the stars, knowing they would face together whatever came their way. Claire was no longer just a teacher fleeing from her past. She was a complete woman, powerful, determined to use her unique experience to protect others. and Victor was no longer just a widower haunted by guilt. He was a man who had found love twice with the same soul, and who was willing to fight for that love against any force that tried to destroy it. When they returned to the house, they found Julian waiting for them in the library, surrounded by documents and maps. "I found something," he said, pointing to a series of photographs spread out on the table. Locations of all the laboratories Alice discovered, plus some she was still investigating when she died. Claire approached the table and immediately recognized several of the locations through Alice's memories. "This one," she pointed to a photo of a modern building in Los Angeles, "is where Carla Santos is interned. And this," she added, touching another image, "is the main laboratory. It's where Dr. Matthews conducts the most advanced experiments." Victor studied the images. "How many people do you think are still being kept in these places?" "Hundreds," replied Claire somberly. Alice estimated that Dr. Matthews had experimented on more than 500 people over the years. Most didn't survive or were left in a vegetative state when they were no longer useful. "Then we have a lot of work ahead of us," said Julian. Claire nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the strength that came from knowing she wasn't alone. She had Victor, who loved her unconditionally. She had Julian, who shared her traumatic experience and understood what was at stake. And she had Alice, whose memories and determination now were part of who she was. "Yes," she said, looking at the two men who had become her chosen family. But Alice waited years for this opportunity. She never gave up, even knowing she could die trying. "And now we finish what she started," said Victor, placing his hand over hers. Claire smiled, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced for a long time. Tomorrow would begin the most dangerous part of her journey, but she was no longer haunted by the past she couldn't remember, or terrified by an uncertain future. She knew exactly who she was, what she wanted, and what she was willing to fight for, and that made all the difference. 6 months later, Claire was standing on the veranda of a safe house in Lake Tahoe, watching the dawn paint the sky in golden tones over the Sierra Nevada mountains. Her hair had grown and now fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and there was a serenity in her eyes that didn't exist before the integration with Alice's memories. She was holding a cup of coffee in her hands, but her mind was completely focused on what would happen in the next few hours. Today would be the day. After months of meticulous planning, careful infiltration, and evidence gathering, Operation Synthesis would finally be executed. Simultaneously, in 5 different cities across the United States, FBI teams would raid Dr. Matthews' laboratories, rescue the victims still alive, and arrest everyone involved in the network of illegal experiments. Victor approached from behind, wrapping his arms around her and resting his chin on her shoulder. In the last few months, they had become not just lovers, but true partners in the fight against the conspiracy that had destroyed so many lives. Victor had used all the resources of the Ravenswood family to finance the private investigation that complemented the official work of the FBI. "Nervous?" he asked, his voice still hoarse from sleep. "Anxious," corrected Claire. Alice waited years for this moment. "Now we're finally going to do justice." Julian appeared at the door of the veranda, already dressed with the bulletproof vest that they would all wear during the operation. In the last few months, he had revealed himself as an invaluable ally, using his own traumatic experiences to help other victims recover. He had found purpose in the pain he had carried for so many years. "Major Cunningham is on the phone," he said. "The teams are in position." Claire nodded, drinking the last sip of coffee. She knew her main function today would be at the laboratory in Los Angeles, where Carla Santos was interned. Her unique abilities, the resistance to mind control devices and the ability to access Alice's memories, made her the ideal person to locate and communicate with victims who might be in a fragile psychological state. They entered the house, where an operations center had been set up in the living room. Monitors showed live images of the 5 targets, detailed maps of the buildings, and encrypted communications between the teams. Major Cunningham was coordinating everything from Washington, but each local cell had autonomy to adapt the plan as needed. "Los Angeles team, confirm status," sounded Major Cunningham's voice through the radio. "Los Angeles team confirmed," replied Agent Silver, leader of the operation in the California city. "Targets identified, perimeter established, awaiting order for invasion." Claire, Victor, and Julian headed for 3 armored vehicles that would take them to Los Angeles. During the 2-hour journey, Claire mentally reviewed everything she knew about the main laboratory. Through Alice's memories, she knew the layout of the building, knew where the victims were kept, and understood the security protocols that Dr. Matthews used. But there was something more. In the last few weeks, she had developed the ability to feel other minds that had been subjected to the same experiments. It was as if the shared trauma created an invisible connection between all the victims. And today she could feel that there were at least 15 people still alive in the Los Angeles laboratory, all in different stages of mental deterioration. "Claire," said Victor, holding her hand during the trip, "promise me you'll be careful in there. Dr. Matthews is capable of anything when he feels cornered." "I promise," she replied. "But you also need to promise that you won't do anything too heroic. Alice wouldn't forgive if something happened to you because of me." Julian, who was in the front seat, turned to them. "Don't worry. I've been in that laboratory before. I know all the escape routes, all the vulnerable points. We'll go in, rescue the victims, and get out. Quick and clean." At 10 in the morning, the 3 vehicles stopped on a residential street 2 blocks from the laboratory. The building in question was a neurological rehabilitation clinic of completely normal appearance, with well-maintained gardens and a discreet sign at the entrance. No one would suspect that in the underground floors, some of the most horrible experiments of modern medicine were being conducted. Claire put on the bulletproof vest and checked the communication equipment that would keep her in contact with all the teams. She also carried a special device developed by FBI technicians, an apparatus that could neutralize the signals from the neural implants in case Dr. Matthews tried to use the victims against the rescue team. "All teams, attention," sounded Major Cunningham's voice. "Operation Synthesis authorized. I repeat, Operation Synthesis is authorized. Execute." What followed was precise military coordination that Claire had never imagined she would witness. In 5 cities simultaneously, dozens of federal agents invaded Dr. Matthews' laboratories. In Los Angeles, Claire's team was divided into 3 groups, one for the ground floor, one for the administrative offices, and one for the underground laboratories where the victims were kept. Claire, Victor, and Julian descended through the emergency stairs directly to the basement. The smell of the place hit Claire like a physical memory, disinfectant, fear, and something darker she couldn't identify. It was exactly like Hope Institute, just with more modern equipment. "This way," whispered Julian, guiding them through white corridors illuminated by fluorescent lights. "The isolation cells are at the end of this corridor." Claire could feel the minds of the victims becoming clearer as they approached. There was pain, confusion, and a terrible resignation that broke her heart. But there was also something more, a spark of hope, as if they could feel that someone was coming to rescue them. They reached an area that looked like a psychiatric hospital, with individual rooms protected by steel doors with small windows. Claire looked through the first window and saw a young woman of about 20, too thin, staring fixedly at the ceiling. Her eyes were open, but there was a vacancy in them that suggested her mind had withdrawn to a very distant place. "Carla?" whispered Claire, recognizing the girl from Alice's memories. Julian unlocked the door with an access card he had stolen from an unconscious guard. Claire entered slowly, trying not to frighten the young woman. "Carla, my name is Claire. I'm here to take you home." Carla's eyes moved slowly until they focused on Claire's face. For a moment, there was no recognition. But then something deep moved in her expression. "Alice," she whispered. "You came back?" Claire felt tears streaming down her face. "Yes, in a way. And now we're getting out of here." She helped Carla stand up, supporting her as they walked out of the room. Victor and Julian were freeing other prisoners, some in better condition than others, but all clearly traumatized by years of experiments. It was when they were helping the last prisoner that they heard the familiar voice echoing through the laboratory's loudspeakers. "Claire, my dear, welcome back home. Dr. Matthews." The corridor lights flickered and then went out, leaving only the emergency lighting. Security doors began to close automatically, trying to isolate different sections of the laboratory. "He's trying to trap us here," shouted Julian, running to prevent one of the doors from closing completely. Victor helped Claire move the victims to a safer area. "Where is he?" Claire closed her eyes, using her developed abilities to locate the source of the neural signals she could feel. "On the upper floor control room." "Take the victims to the emergency exit," said Victor. "I'll go after him." "No," said Claire firmly. "We'll go after him, together." They managed to get all the victims to the extraction area, where other agents received them and took them to ambulances waiting outside. Claire, Victor, and Julian then went up to the main floor following the signals Claire could detect. They found Dr. Matthews in the control room, surrounded by monitors showing images of all the laboratories being invaded simultaneously. He was older, thinner, but his eyes maintained the same calculated coldness that Claire remembered. "Admirable," he said, without turning to them. 15 years of work undone in one morning. 15 years of torture and murder, corrected Claire, entering the room with Victor and Julian flanking her. Dr. Matthews finally turned, and Claire saw that he was holding a control device much more sophisticated than the previous ones. "You've become everything I hoped for, Claire. The fusion with Alice's memories has given you capabilities that even I couldn't imagine possible. Capabilities that I'll use to ensure you never hurt anyone again." "Oh, my dear," laughed Dr. Matthews, "you still don't understand, do you? You're not my victim. You're my greatest creation. And now I'm going to complete what I started." He pressed several buttons on the device, and immediately Claire felt an intense pressure in her head. But this time she didn't resist. Instead, she allowed the signal to enter her mind, and then followed it back to the source. What she did next surprised even herself. Instead of just resisting Dr. Matthews' control, she reversed the signal and began projecting her own neural waves through his system. Dr. Matthews screamed and dropped the device, which began to emit sparks and smoke. "How? This is impossible." "You taught me how to do this," said Claire, approaching him. "You taught me that minds can connect, that consciousnesses can be shared. Now I'm sharing something with you." She touched Dr. Matthews's forehead, and through the physical contact began transferring to him all the memories of his victims. Each moment of pain, each traumatic experience, each destroyed life. Everything flowed from Claire to his mind. Dr. Matthews fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the avalanche of suffering he had caused over decades. "Stop! Please! I can't." "You can," said Claire, maintaining the contact. "You will carry this for the rest of your life as we carried it. The only difference is that we learned to transform our pain into strength. You will learn to live with your guilt." When Claire finally released Dr. Matthews, he was completely broken. Federal agents entered the room at that moment, arresting him as he incoherently mumbled about voices in his head. "Is it over?" asked Victor, placing his hand on Claire's shoulder. "Almost," she replied, looking at the monitors that still showed operations in other cities. "There's still one person left." 3 hours later, they were in an interrogation room in Washington, observing through a one-way mirror as Major Cunningham questioned Senator Robert Castellani. The politician had been arrested at his mansion in Washington, surrounded by documentary evidence that Alice had collected over years. "Senator," Major Cunningham was saying, "we have bank records showing transfers from your personal account to Dr. Matthews's laboratories. We have recordings of you discussing the experiments, and now we have Dr. Matthews himself willing to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence." Castellani, a 60-year-old man who looked 40 due to the treatments he had received, maintained an arrogant expression. "You can't prove anything, and even if you could, I have parliamentary immunity." "Parliamentary immunity doesn't apply to crimes against humanity," replied Major Cunningham. "And that's exactly what you financed." Claire observed through the glass, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice was finally being done, but the cost had been so high. So many lives lost, so many minds destroyed, so many devastated families. Victor hugged her from behind. "Alice would be proud." "She is proud," corrected Claire. "I can feel her." Julian joined them in the observation room. "I just received news from the other operations. We rescued 43 victims in total. 8 are in critical condition, but the doctors think all can recover with time and proper treatment." Claire nodded, feeling a weight being lifted from her shoulders. "And the other responsible parties?" 17 arrests so far, including 3 doctors, 2 hospital administrators, and several technicians, reported Julian. "The network is completely dismantled." At that moment, Major Cunningham left the interrogation room and joined them. Castellani finally broke. He confessed everything. The financing, the experiments, even Alice Ravenswood's murder. Claire felt her legs weaken. Finally, the complete truth was exposed. He admitted he ordered her death when he discovered she was about to expose the entire operation. continued Major Cunningham. Two of his men threw her from the balcony and staged an accident. Victor closed his fists, anger burning in his eyes. How long will he get? With all the charges. Life imprisonment, without possibility of parole. 2 weeks later, Claire was back at the Ravenswood property for the first time since they had fled. The house had been completely cleared by investigators, but still carried memories in each room. She went up to Alice's room, which now looked different, no longer a melancholy sanctuary, but a loving memorial to a brave woman. Victor found her there, sitting in the armchair where Alice used to read. "How does it feel being back?" he asked. "Complete," replied Claire. "For the first time since it all began, I feel I can finally rest." Victor knelt beside the armchair, holding her hands. "Claire, there's something I want to ask." She looked at him, seeing nervousness in his eyes. "What?" "I want you to marry me," he said simply. "Not because you carry Alice's memories, not because I need to replace what I lost, but because you, Claire Sullivan, are the most extraordinary woman I've ever met, and I can't imagine my life without you." Claire felt tears streaming down her face. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a deep joy that she didn't know was possible to feel. "Yes," she said, "but with one condition." "Anything. I want us to transform part of the property into a rehabilitation center for victims of illegal medical experiments. Alice always wanted to help other people who went through what we went through. Now we can make that happen." Victor smiled, a smile that lit up his entire face. Alice would definitely approve. They married 3 months later, in a small ceremony in the gardens of the Ravenswood property. Julian was the best man, and several of the victims they had rescued were present, including Carla Santos, who was recovering wonderfully well with proper treatment. During the ceremony, Claire wore Alice's wedding dress, not as an attempt to replace her, but as a way to honor her memory and the sacrifice she had made. When the minister asked if she took Victor as her husband, Claire replied, "We do." And everyone present knew she was speaking for herself and for Alice, two women who had become one, two souls that finally found peace. 2 years later, the Alice Ravenswood Recovery Center was fully functioning, offering free treatment to victims of illegal medical experiments from all over the United States. Claire directed the therapeutic programs, using her unique experience to help others recover from similar traumas. Victor had transformed part of the vineyards into therapeutic gardens, where patients could work with plants and find peace in nature. The property that once held so many secrets was now a place of healing and hope. Julian had become one of the center's main therapists, specializing in helping adolescents who had been subjected to experiments. He had found redemption helping others overcome the same traumas he had carried for so many years. Dr. Matthews had been sentenced to life imprisonment, but not in a common prison. Due to the state of his mind after receiving all the traumatic memories of the victims, he was interned in a maximum security psychiatric institution where he would spend the rest of his days dealing with the weight of his actions. Senator Castellani had also received life imprisonment, and his conviction had exposed an even larger network of political corruption that extended across several states. His fall had resulted in a complete reform of the American medical supervision system. On an autumn afternoon, Claire was in the center's library, working with a 16-year-old girl who had been rescued from a clandestine laboratory in Oregon. The girl, Maria, had been subjected to memory transfer experiments and was having difficulty distinguishing between her own memories and those that had been implanted. "How do you manage?" asked Maria. "How do you live with 2 series of memories in your head?" Claire smiled, looking through the window where she could see Victor working in the gardens with other patients. "Because I learned they aren't 2 series of memories. They're 2 perspectives of the same life. Alice gave me her experiences, but I choose what to do with them. And I choose to use everything, the pain and the joy, the trauma and the healing, to help people like you." Maria nodded slowly. "And the confusion? When I don't know if a feeling is mine or hers? With time, you realize it doesn't matter where the feeling comes from. What matters is that it's yours now. You have the right to feel love, anger, hope, fear, regardless of where those emotions originated." That night, Claire and Victor walked through the vineyards as they did almost every night. It was a ritual that connected them not just to each other, but also to Alice's memory and to the property that had become their home. "Any regrets?" asked Victor, making the same question he had asked the night before they fled the first time. Claire kissed him, a kiss that carried all the love she felt, as Claire, as Alice, as the complete woman she had become. "None," she said. "Alice taught me that true love doesn't end with death. It transforms, evolves, finds new ways to exist. I love her for what she gave me. And I love you for what we built together." Victor hugged her under the stars, knowing he had found something rare and precious. Not just love, but redemption. Not just a second chance, but a completely new life. And when they returned home that night, Claire stopped for a moment at the entrance to the library, where a portrait of Alice hung next to a photo of her wedding to Victor. There was no more pain in that look at the past, only gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered to the portrait, "for everything." And for a moment, she could swear she saw Alice smile. Claire Sullivan had arrived at the Ravenswood property as a teacher fleeing from her traumatic past. She would leave as a complete woman, powerful, loved, and determined to use her unique experience to make the world a better place. She had found not just love, but also herself, and she had discovered that sometimes becoming who you really are requires embracing not just your own story, but also the stories of those who came before you. In the end, Claire and Alice weren't two different women. They were two expressions of the same brave soul, two faces of the same infinite capacity to love, resist, and transform pain into hope. And Victor Ravenswood had been blessed with the privilege of loving both. The story had begun with mystery and ended with redemption. It had begun with secrets and ended with truth. It had begun with two wounded people seeking healing and ended with two integrated souls ready to heal the world. And in the vineyards of Sonoma Valley, where the wind carried aromas of ripe grapes and promises of new beginnings, love had proven once again that it is stronger than any force that tries to destroy it. The love of Claire and Victor, the love of Alice, preserved and transformed. The love of all those who fight against darkness and choose to believe in light. Some loves are destined to last only one lifetime. Others, like this one, were made to last forever.